welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you this rainy, cold and chilly fall Friday afternoon. It's another Friday night in the big town, and this is our post-election podcast. I'm doing it alone as well. So listeners who enjoy solo episodes, you're welcome. And for the rest of you, I'm sorry. This is the way it is. Scott and I are hanging out later tonight. We've discussed the idea of recording together, and we decided we would rather eat and drink together than record our conversation. And I think that's a good place to start, is about how we are having conversations about the election results in our worlds. Not every conversation needs to be public. Not every thought we have, every feeling we have is required to be posted on social media. And I am not criticizing those who do. I appreciate those who feel confident and comfortable enough to share their thoughts and feelings. And in many cases, that is affirming or helpful or instructive to those who are around us, people who might read it. I have personally resisted posting anything, really much of anything, since the election because I wanted to sit with my feelings and my thoughts and to listen to others, because I think there's a lot to be learned after every election, especially big, immensely consequential elections like the election of a new president. And I just have a lot of mixed feelings, to be honest, about a lot of things. You know, I'm just going to jump in. Clearly, you've already figured that out. Let's jump in together. Hold your nose. Jump into the deep end. Kaploosh. I don't have a ploosh sound effect. I should get one. Anyway, the presidential election, obviously, Donald J. Trump was elected to a second term. Not reelected, but a second term nonetheless. And somewhat commandingly so, right? A definitive result, which I think overall is good. I said to many people before the election, my hope was that we had a decisive outcome, because the murky outcome is what makes us all nervous, right? We were nervous about, well, not just lawsuits, but political violence, to be quite honest. And the fact that a substantial majority of American voters elected Trump and Vance for the next presidential administration should tell us something about where most of American voters are at. Now, a big caveat, an asterisk on that statement, is that this is most voters who turned out to vote, right? It is not necessarily most Americans. Those are different numbers. But all we have to go on, right, is who votes. Because, as we say in most every episode, decisions are made by those who show up. And of the people who showed up, a majority of them, in almost every state, selected the Trump ticket. And so now it is up to all of us, regardless of who you voted for, Trump, Harris, Stein, or somebody else, to figure out what this means for America, what this might mean for our lives and for the lives of the communities around us. There's levels to this conversation. I certainly do not have all the answers by any stretch of the mind, but I can tell you that this is something that we each have to think about a lot. I do appreciate the decisiveness with this. I'm glad it's not murky. I'm glad we're not facing lawsuits and, attacks on the Capitol or anything like that, right? It seems like maybe that has been avoided, that some of the energy, the angst, the anxiety, the pressure that was filling the air and the spaces between us up until the election has been relieved a little bit. I admittedly feel some relief in that this is over, that we have a decision. And now we get to move forward as a country, and what this means for the next 4 years. Let's put a pin in this. Okay, let's come back to the presidential election for just a minute, if I may. Let's just put a pause on this. For a couple of reasons. One, I want to apologize. I'm a little stuffy today. I've talked a lot this week. I've had lots of meetings. The Oklahoma Political Science Association has their annual convention the week of the election. It's my first time to attend. It was good. It was difficult in some ways. I had a lot of other data I would rather crunch. There's a lot of numbers I would like to look at that I haven't been able to get to yet. So I don't have the full analysis of what turnout looks like yet. But rest assured, we'll come back to that in a future episode. But we'll talk about what we do know, the numbers we do have, and the outcomes that we have been watching most closely. And then we'll come back to the presidential election, right? And then we'll talk about what happens next. Does that sound good? And I'm going to try to be brief. Okay, my goal is to hit this in like 25 minutes, and we're already at 6, so I better get rolling. On the state level, in the state legislature, not much change, honestly. A whole bunch of incumbents won on Tuesday. More incumbents were decided in June in the primary when they won that race. And even more than that were decided back in April or March when they filed for office, because most legislative seats had no opponent. Most of them won by default because they were the only person to file for that seat. In some rare instances, there were races that were competitive, and in almost every case, the incumbent won. There were very few surprises. I don't think any surprises, really, on election night. And that means that the balance of power in the state legislature is exactly the same as it was on Monday before the election. Nothing has changed. On Tuesday night, I was on the local news station, Fox 25, and I was on there with Speaker-elect Kyle Hilbert, and as well as Wendy Suarez and Adam King, I think his last name is, the two anchors there, to talk about this. And one of the things we noted was like the big surprise is that there's no surprise, right? That it's really kind of a status quo. Most every challenger to the legislative seats, most of the incumbents were Republicans. Most of the challengers were Democrats, with a few independents, and they all lost. Again, also pretty decisively. And that is probably not unexpected in this environment. It is increasingly difficult to run for office, especially to challenge the incumbents in presidential cycles. In the last few cycles, we've not seen a lot of change in that. So while that may be disheartening for some and encouraging for others, all I can say is it is what it is. The election has happened, the people have spoken, and now we have to move forward. On more local levels, the mayor of Tulsa, it's a new mayor, right? It was an open seat. Mayor Bynum was not seeking re-election. There had been a primary and a runoff, and I guess a general and a runoff, and then it came down to this. This was the runoff between County Commissioner Karen Keith and former Representative Monroe Nichols, and Nichols was victorious in that election. That makes him the first black person to serve as mayor of Tulsa, which is immensely historic, and a huge kudos to and hats off to Mayor-elect Nichols. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. We care a lot about policy here at Let's Fix This. We care about outcomes. We care about representation and what matters. And I think while the policy and the outcomes are yet to be determined, of course, by the Nichols administration, the representation is a big deal. For a city that just a little over 100 years ago bombed and murdered its black residents in the Tulsa Race Massacre, to finally come back and elect a black person as mayor is absolutely nothing short of historic. It's very exciting. I know Monroe a little bit. I have always found him to be a good man. I don't know Karen Keith. I've met her once, very briefly. I've absolutely nothing to say either direction. I don't know anything about her, but I'm excited for the future of Tulsa. I'm excited for Monroe to be the new mayor, what this means for him as an individual, and more importantly, what this means for Tulsa as a community. That's about it on the state level. Honestly, I'm running through my head of all the things to talk about. On the election results, it was honestly kind of boring, right? Both the state questions, one failed, one passed, which is what everyone expected, right? The one to change just one single word about citizens voting, that passed overwhelmingly as we expected, because it doesn't really do anything. It was just like a single verbiage change. It was more of like a virtue signal, if you will. Perhaps a way to drive turnout, although I don't imagine anyone was turning out to vote for that wasn't already planning to vote for the presidential race. The other state question that would have created public infrastructure districts failed, as I think most people expected it would. Both of those measures were legislatively referred measures. They were not citizen-led initiatives. So it was constitutional changes that the legislature sent to the ballot. So 1-1 there. The other big issue on the ballot were the judicial retention races, in particular the 3 state Supreme Court races. I am certain you saw ads about this. I barely watch TV, and I saw ads about this. It came down 2-1. 2 of the 3 justices were retained. 1 was not, all by pretty slim margins. We were watching it real close at the station. We thought all 3 were going to go down. And as it turned out, 2 of them narrowly hung on, Edmondson and the other one, I forget who it is now. Justice Yvonne Cogger was not retained. So she is the first state Supreme Court justice to ever not be retained in an election, which is historic on its own. Justice Cogger, as the mailers you probably received indicated, is 87 years old. And while I have found her to be a fair and honest jurist, that is a number that I think is problematic for a lot of voters. We don't have all the data yet on turnout, and we don't know like who voted for who, but I can say anecdotally that the messaging about these justices clearly made an impact, right? The people who were running the campaign to not retain these justices spent in the neighborhood of $1.5 or $2 million trying to get them off the bench. There was a campaign to keep them on the bench that also spent about $2 million, so a pretty even match financially in terms of funding. But I think the message that they were liberal, particularly paired with the presidential election, definitely made an impact. And if the way that we know is you look at all of the other judicial retention races on the ballot, and they were not near as close. Like they were much more lopsided. I think all of them were retained. And so it seems clear that there was some impact from the campaign to unseat those 3 justices. But why Cogger, right? That's the question. District 4, why Cogger? It was districts 3, 4, and 7. And so she was the second justice listed on the ballot. And I don't have any definitive answers. I will tell you anecdotally, I've heard from a couple of people that went in to vote, and they said when it gets to those races, they don't know anything about them, and so they vote yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, all the way down. I can't imagine there were very many people who did that, but if there's a few votes that might have been no for Justice Cogger. I think more significantly is the issue of her age, right? Where age had been an issue in this election in other ways, particularly related to President Biden. And I think a lot of people saw that mailer or heard from their friends that she was 87 years old and thought, oof, like that's almost 90. Like maybe she shouldn't be on the bench. Now, I will say when I have been around her, she was, like I didn't notice age. I would have guessed she was younger. I was surprised when I saw that number as well. But I think I can understand where voters were hesitant to retain someone of that age. If for another reason that, there's some likelihood that she could have passed away during the next term, and certainly some concern about cognitive decline at that age. Now, it is somewhat interesting if people voted to not return her and did vote for President Trump, who will be the oldest president we've ever had, up in his 80s as well. Not that far off from her age, but, there are no facts. There are only interpretations, and I think people perceive them differently. There is potentially also the issue of her gender, right? Someone remarked to me that from their perspective, her name was the most feminine sounding name, Yvonne, right? And so that if people were hesitant to have a female jurist on the bench, or there was an anti-female sentiment, that could have factored in as well. All of these things are possible, right? We really don't know what was in the minds of voters in the ballot box. So I think we'll just have to kind of wait and see. So what this means is that moving forward, Governor Stitt will have the opportunity to appoint yet one more justice. He's already appointed 3 of the 9 justices, I believe. I think it's 3. And so that means that there will have been there will be 2 justices on the state Supreme Court who were appointed by Democratic governors many, many years ago, and that there will be 7 appointed by Republican governors. The way that we appoint justices in Oklahoma involves a commission called the Judicial Nominating Commission that is more or less run by the Bar Association, right? So it's kind of like the Attorneys Association. And they nominate 3 potential candidates to the governor. And then from those, the governor selects one to nominate to the bench. If the governor does not like any of them, then they come back with 3 more names and they present those, and he chooses from those 3. So this is a way to insert a bit of a check and balance on executive power here. Now, in recent years, there has been, I'll say, an effort to remove or eliminate the Judicial Nominating Committee or Commission, and I expect we'll see that again this year. In fact, I would imagine, and this is just Andy being, reading the tea leaves, I would imagine that the legislature will someone in the legislature will propose a bill to eliminate the JNC next session, and that they will do so with an emergency clause on the bill so that it will go into effect immediately upon passage. And then I will imagine that Governor Stitt would not appoint someone to fill that position until that bill has a chance to go through, right? So if they can remove the commission, he can sign the bill into law, then he doesn't need the commission to appoint someone, and he can appoint whomever he wants. That person will likely be younger. It is a lifetime appointment. They'll be up for retention ballots, of course, but as we've previously discussed, no one until Justice Cogger has ever not been retained. So it's effectively a lifetime appointment. And that'll be 4, so almost a majority of seats appointed by one governor, which seems to be, in my opinion, like a bit of a separation of powers issue, right? Like there should be, I don't think one governor should be allowed to appoint half the bench. That's just me, though. Maybe I'm way off on that. But we'll find out. I don't have any insight onto who might be nominated. We will confront that when we get there. I will say that all 3 of those judicial retention races were extremely close, right? Like less than a point, less than half a point almost in all of them. I'm looking at the results right now. In District 3, it was 50.26 to 49.74%. Justice Cogger's race, District 4, she lost 49.76 to 50.24%. So again, right at half a percentage point. And then Justice Edmondson, who I believe is the brother of former Attorney General and gubernatorial candidate Drew Edmondson, had the commanding lead of 51.01% to 48.99%. So exactly 1% different. Very close. In terms of raw votes, that means that Cogger was not retained by a margin of roughly like 7,000 votes, like maybe a little bit less. Real close. Out of 1.4 million votes. So like a small margin. So when you think about whether or not your vote matters, like this is a good example of where it does, right? If only 7,000 people out of 1.4 million make the difference in a state Supreme Court justice being retained or not retained, that's a big deal. Your vote matters. Looking ahead, just as a quick plug, in February, we will have municipal races for like city council across the state. Also, I think some school board races, and in Oklahoma County at least, you will have one county commissioner's race, a special election. Carrie Bloomertz, since she resigned, her seat will be on the ballot beginning in February with a primary. And so elections don't stop. I know that's probably not the news you want to hear right now, but that's the truth, right? Like, life goes on. Elections go on. Democracy, America, Oklahoma, it all goes on. All right, we're at 20 minutes. I'm trying to wrap up in 4. Let's go back to the presidential election. There's a lot of folks that are sharing platitudes. There's a lot of folks that are sharing safe spaces. A lot of folks that are sharing I told you so's. A lot of hot takes about what people could have done or should have done. And I don't have any of the answers to any of that stuff. I have been really struggling this week to identify exactly how I feel and why I feel that way and what I think this all means for myself and, more importantly, for my broader community, for the state, right? And for the country. I've had messages from friends and family across the country also wrestling with the same things. Some folks are really eager to get involved and say, I want to get involved. I want to do something. I want to change the world right now. And I get that sentiment. But also, like, life and politics is a marathon, not a sprint. There's a lot that we should plan for. We cannot have a gut reaction and expect it to be successful, right? Success in politics takes time. It takes years. It takes effort. It takes coalition building. It takes grassroots organizing. It takes you having actual face-to-face conversations with lots and lots and lots of people over a long time, building relationships with them, not just preaching at them, but actually getting to know people and listening to them for the future. My wife sent me a thing on Instagram today from someone, I don't even know who it is. It's from Ibram Kendi. Okay, I do know who that is. So a historian, national award winner he's an author. He wrote How to Be Anti-Racist and How to Raise an Anti-Racist. So perhaps a notable progressive author. I've not read either of those books, but I know they exist. And it resonated. So I'll read this real quick. He says, "We can hate the people who have been taught to hate. We can continue the destructive blame game. We can sink deeper into the kryptonite of radical change, which is cynicism. We can paralyze ourselves in fear of what's to come. Or we can really feel all of the anger and sadness, fully bottle it all up, let it fuel the anti-racist and the feminist power within us, and get back to our constructive work. The best way to protect ourselves from what's to come is to construct what's to come." And then he used that last line as the caption on the post. The best way to protect ourselves from what's to come is for us to construct what's to come. I don't know what's to come. Right. Superintendent Walters has already sent out a memo about the expected repeal or elimination of the U.S. Department of Education. And for most of us, that's something that's been around our whole lives. It was created in 1979, 1980 by President Jimmy Carter. And immediately upon his election in 1980, Ronald Reagan said he was going to dissolve it. And he didn't. And several times since then, it has been touted that it's going to be dissolved. And it hasn't been. Will it be now? Maybe. Maybe not. When President Trump took office in 2016, he said he was going to dissolve the Environmental Protection Agency. In fact, he hired Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to come run the EPA with the intent of dissolving it. They didn't. Will they do it this time? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Treasury Secretary Jerome Powell, yesterday the Fed lowered in rates by 0.25%, which is good. That means that inflation is cooling off. Things are doing okay. They felt like they could lower interest rates again. I wish I'd waited to buy my house, but here we are. And reporters asked him, like, can the president's asked for you to, the president-elect has asked for you to resign. Are you going to? He said no. They said, do you think he can remove you from office? And he said no. Will President-elect Trump try to remove Secretary Powell from office? Maybe. Maybe not. Will he be successful? Fuck if I know. Honestly, I don't know. These are big questions that we have not confronted as a country ever, or at least not for a long time. So there is an uncharted territory element of this that we just don't know. I don't like uncertainties, but man, that's what life is all about. I somewhat fortunately had a therapy appointment scheduled for this Wednesday, the day after the election. I go every other week, and it just happened to fall this way, and that was serendipitous. And it was a good session, probably the best one I've had, to be honest. It wasn't really about politics. It was about me and work and family and all the things you go to therapy about. And I, somewhere along the way, kind of said, there's a lot of uncertainty about the next 4 years. And my therapist asked something along the lines of, okay, what were you doing 5 years ago? And she didn't say that exactly, but that's what I took away from it. And I got back in my car and, I immediately had a Zoom meeting, which was poor scheduling on my part. But after that Zoom meeting, I spent some time thinking about that, about life, about me, about where I was 5 years ago. And then I thought about where I was 5 years before that. And this may or may not be helpful to you, but it's helpful to me. And so I'm going to share it that, 5 years ago, in 2019, Donald Trump was president. There were some wild things happening in the world of politics and, economics and foreign relations. But in my life, like the things that I look back and what defines 2019 for me is that my wife and I had just gotten married the year before. We'd bought a house. She was pregnant by this point in 2019. But the things that defined the next 5 years, so from 2019 to today, I could have not predicted in any way, right? Most notably, the COVID pandemic, right? In November of 2019, none of us saw that coming. Something that was a definitive experience for all of us, we did not see coming. I lost my mother to COVID in December of 2020. Lost my father this summer. I did not see either of those coming, even a month beforehand, right? It was completely unexpected. Our daughter was born. There's some trauma around the birth, and we learned about her genetic condition and disability, and that was also very unexpected. So the things that define my life today, in no way could I have predicted or even foreseen, not even a glimmer 5 years ago. That is wild to me, right? The things that so define our life today, we might not even be aware of 5 years previously. And then going back 5 years before that to 2014, right? I was working at OU. Let's Fix This did not exist, was not even an idea. I wasn't thinking about voting or really wasn't thinking about politics that much. It was nuts. Governor Fallon was getting reelected. I was in the midst of a divorce. I just filed for divorce. I was very poor. I was sleeping on an air mattress on the floor. My car was beat up, but I didn't have the money to repair it. Life was really hard. I was eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 2 or 3 meals a day. Lots of mac and cheese, occasionally some broccoli if I had the kids and was feeling healthy. It was a very different world. And there was no way in 2014 that I could have imagined that in 2019 I would leave my job, my good job at OU, to go run a statewide ballot initiative campaign, that I would be married to somebody else, that we'd be expecting a child, that I would be on the precipice of a global pandemic and losing both my parents and having a child with a disability, and completely upending our entire world. And so I say, if I go back even further, right? 5 years before 2014, it was 2009. Okay, well, I just started at OU. I just got married back then. Was living in an apartment, was building a house. It was there is nothing about life in 2009 that would have predicted life in 2014 or life in 2019 or life in 2024. And the uncertainty about what life will look like in 5 years is so immense that I can't even fathom it, right? The possibilities that our lives hold in 5 years are so enormous, so broad, so vast, so disparate that I am not going to waste a single minute trying to imagine where I might be in 5 years, because I don't know. The things that will define my life in 5 years, I probably could not come up with on my most creative day, right? Whether they are good or they are terrible, I could not guess. Today has enough troubles. I am not going to worry about the troubles of tomorrow just yet. Now, that is not to say that we shouldn't prepare, that we shouldn't gird up our loins, that we shouldn't support one another. We shouldn't make some plans. You should always do those things. I have always, not always, probably since 2009, honestly, is when I started making plans for 1 year and 5 years. And often those were aspirational, and often they happened. But when I look back, those plans I made were not the things that defined my life a year or 5 years after. They were things that I saw in my myopia, in my short-term vision, things that I thought were important, that 5 years later weren't even on the radar, right? So I'm telling you, go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong with planning. If you don't plan, you will never get there, right? If you don't know where you're headed, you will never get there. But also know that where you're going, you might not even know yet. And where we're going as a country, we might not know yet either. It is pretty easy right now to cast a vision that's dark. We can look at other examples, right? Hungary, Turkey. Some people will look at like 1930s Germany if they're really dark about what the future might look like. And maybe they'll be right. We won't know for a few years. But there's also a world where they're way, way wrong. We are stronger than we understand. We are more resilient than we believe. We have more support in our communities than we've ever tried to tap into. And as much as any of us might feel scared or worried or hurt or confused about the outcome of the election, or happy even, some of them might be happy. Whatever feelings you have about the election this week, you are not alone in that, and you will never be alone as we go forward. For the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've done this podcast almost every week. I think this is episode 277. It's not entirely weekly because life gets in the way, but it's been almost every week. Some of you have been listening since the beginning. I had someone today subscribe and she said, "You've got 276 episodes. You must be doing something right." I don't know if that's true, but like persistence pays off, right? There's value, I believe, which is why I'm sitting here in this closet by myself late on a Friday afternoon, talking to you, that I believe that this relationship matters between me as a host and you as a listener and the many, many of you who have become friends over the years. I think this matters. I think Oklahoma matters. I think America matters. I think our community matters. And I believe that everybody in our community matters, regardless of who you voted for on Tuesday, regardless of the reason you voted for that person. You have a life and you have value. We might disagree on a great, great many things. Some of those I am wrong about. Some of them you might be too. And I don't know what the next 5 years brings, but I do know that I'm committed to building the best future that I possibly can. For you, for me, for our friends, for our kids. The best way to protect ourselves from what's to come is to construct what's to come. So as we go forward this week, this month, through the end of this year and into 2025, there's a lot that's to come. There's a lot of work that we can do together. Take time. Take whatever time you need right now to rest, to recuperate, to think, to journal, to listen, to draw, to art, to hang out with family, to, get drunk at your friend's house and laugh at things inappropriately, whatever you got to do, right? Like, don't hurt others, find joy where you can, and continue to move forward. We will probably take a bit of a break from the podcast, I think, for a couple of weeks. My next month is real busy. I've got a national conference I'm planning. It's the holidays. I got stuff to do at home that I've neglected since July when my dad passed away that I've got to get done soon. So if you don't see an episode in your feed for a couple of weeks, know that I haven't forgotten. I'm telling you up front, it might be a couple of weeks. But as we move into 2025, it's a new day, it's a new light, it's a new year. We've got some work to do. And every step along the way matters. You're not giving up. I'm holding you to it. And I'm not going to give up either. We're in this together. As I said earlier, decisions are made by those who show up. Over the next week or two, think about how you can show up better in your life, in your community, and what that looks like. Cool? Cool. All right, folks. I love you. Have a good week. Sorry, that got real loud right then because I was grooving out to it. If you're still listening, this was way more than 25 minutes. I'm sorry. I was grooving into it too. I hope it's okay. I'll see you soon. Oh, the music ended. That's it. That's the end of the episode. Good night, folks.